The garland shimmered on the table as my daughter handed me the plate with a smile that was too perfect to be sincere. On Christmas Eve, her house smelled of vanilla cinnamon and old promises. "Dad, I made your favorite cupcakes. Eat one, please," she said. Something in her eyes froze my blood. I am 62 years old. I have seen many looks in my life, and hers was not one of affection, but of calculation. I will never forget the dark feeling crawling up my spine while family laughter floated around me. There was laughter silverware clinking soft Christmas carols on the radio, and my son-in-law Michael telling a trivial story. I nodded, but my attention was trapped on the slight trembling of her hands as she arranged the plates. I thought about my years of hard work. I thought about the sacrifices I made to give her an education, a house, and security. I also thought about how insolent her ambition had become over the last year. The cupcake in front of me looked harmless. It was a small treat, topped with pink frosting. However, something in her smile did not match the sweetness. It was as if she were celebrating a victory I did not yet understand. I picked up my fork slowly. I looked at my daughter one more time and understood that my unease was not fear but instinct. When you get old, you learn to listen to your body before you listen to people. Without making a sound, I took advantage of the moment everyone was laughing and discreetly switched my plate with her husband's. It was a minimal gesture, almost ridiculous, but I felt immediate relief. No one noticed. My daughter kept talking without taking her eyes off me. Time seemed to stretch like a taut thread, and the dessert sat between us, like a twisted promise, waiting to be fulfilled in silence. But before we continue, I would like to know if you have subscribed to the channel William's Revenge Stories, and if you liked the video. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now let's continue. 15 minutes later, my daughter's husband clutched his chest, as if something were burning him from the inside. His laughter died halfway through a sentence, and the glass slipped from his fingers, smashing onto the floor. The shattering glass cut through the festive air of the night. My daughter stood up abruptly, faking alarm, and everyone surrounded the table. I remained motionless, with an ancient cold walking down my back. His breathing became harsh, and I understood that the time for pretending was over for everyone. They called an ambulance while he doubled over with a groan that still echoes in my ears. Amidst the chaos, my daughter sought my gaze with a panic she could no longer hide. For an instant our eyes met, and I knew she understood. She understood that her trap had not fallen where she expected. I feigned shock, but inside, a certainty held me up. That cupcake was not meant for her husband. The entire living room turned into a whirlpool of voices, phones, nervous footsteps, and lights turning on without any order. On the way to the hospital, I rode in silence in the back seat of a neighbor's car. My daughter was in the front, trembling, giving useless orders. I watched the streetlights pass by like twisted memories. I thought about the recent arguments over money. I thought about her anxiety to advance the inheritance. I thought about the coldness with which she spoke to me weeks ago. Every piece fell into place with cruel precision. The instinct that saved me that night began to demand explanations, and I knew that Christmas had ceased to be a holiday forever. The doctors took him away immediately while we stayed in the waiting room with Christmas decorations still hanging on our clothes. My daughter paced from one side to the other, repeating that it was all an accident. I nodded without saying a word. Inside, the old archive of my memory opened up. Hidden debts, nervous visits, questions about my properties. None of that had been accidental. The woman in front of me was no longer just my daughter. She was also a suspect, and for the first time I felt fear of the blood that connected us. When a nurse came out to ask for clinical data, my daughter volunteered to answer with a speed that confirmed my doubts even more. She named allergies, medications, and habits I did not know about. While she spoke, she avoided looking at me. There was a clumsy tone in her voice, as if she were reciting a poorly learned alibi. I answered only what was essential when they asked about me. No one noticed the storm growing silently inside my aging chest. I thought then that the truth would eventually surface by its own weight, as always happens with poorly hidden sins. That night, after an endless hour, the doctor announced that the patient had suffered acute poisoning. The word fell like a dagger in the middle of the family gathered in the hallway. My daughter let out a stifled theatrical scream that contrasted with the paleness of her face. I leaned against the wall so I would not fall. The thought I was avoiding settled in with brutal clarity. If I had been obedient, the one on that stretcher right now would be me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, and I understood the real magnitude of that cursed Christmas. When they took blood samples and asked questions about my son-in-law's body, I understood that nothing would ever be the same again. I saw my daughter talking to the doctors, with the police who were starting to arrive, and with the family who pretended not to understand. I kept silent, but not the usual silence. It was an attentive, awake silence loaded with decisions. That night not only was an innocent man's life on the edge, but the certainty was born in me that I had to protect myself from my own blood. The sweet taste of the cupcakes still floated in the air like a ghost. The emergency room door closed behind my son-in-law's body, and with that dry sound, the end of our fake Christmas was sealed. My daughter stood in front of the glass, with her arms crossed over her chest, swaying barely from side to side, as if that minimal oscillation could give her back the control she had lost. I sat in a row of metal chairs, observing her every move, with the precision of someone who can no longer afford to trust. The minutes fell heavily. Every so often she looked at her phone. She locked it and unlocked it. She pretended to talk to a relative, with a friend, with anyone who could reinforce her role as a worried wife. I remained silent, with the image of the cupcakes stuck in my memory like a warning impossible to erase. That pink frosting had been the difference between my calm breathing and the transparent tube now feeding another man. A young doctor finally came out frowning. We managed to stabilize him, but he shows clear signs of poisoning. He said, "We need to know exactly what he ate and what he drank. Did he take any substance out of the ordinary?" My daughter spoke before I could open my mouth. "Nothing strange, doctor, just Christmas dinner. We all ate the same thing." I watched her. Her voice sounded firm, but her tense jaw betrayed her. "Also the desserts?" asked the doctor. "Yes, of course," she replied without hesitating. I looked up then. "Not everyone," I said softly. "The cupcakes were individual." My daughter turned her head sharply toward me. Her eyes widened just enough for me to catch the flash of alarm. The doctor looked at both of us. Each person had a different cupcake. "That is correct," I replied. My daughter made them one by one. The doctor took notes. "We will need to analyze the leftovers," he announced. "Are there cupcakes left at the house?" My daughter pressed her lips together. "Yes, some," she admitted. "The police will take care of collecting them." That moment was the first time I saw true fear cross her face. The following hours were a parade of officials. Questions, forms, and whispers. The word poisoning began to repeat, with a gravity that could no longer be disguised. I answered the minimum, taking care with every word. My daughter, on the other hand, appeared anguished but excessively willing, like someone trying to hide something by offering too much. Inside my mind replayed recent scenes. Her insistence that I come this Christmas, her sudden sweetness, after months of coldness, her insistent curiosity about my assets. Everything I had wanted to interpret as reconciliation was now revealed as a strategy. Near dawn, a police officer approached us. "We will need both of you to accompany us to give a formal statement," he said, in a neutral tone. My daughter nodded immediately. "Of course," she answered, "whatever is necessary." I also nodded, but I did not look at my daughter. In that shared silence, there was no longer an alliance, only a truth starting to break through. At the precinct, the white lights of the interrogation room made me feel older than ever. They offered me water, and I accepted it. My daughter was taken to another room. I did not see her for hours. Meanwhile, an agent asked me questions. What had we eaten? Who had prepared what? What was my relationship with my son-in-law? Were there family conflicts? I answered calmly. I did not hide the recent tensions. I did not mention my direct suspicions yet. I knew that everything must be said in its own time, so as not to die before being born. When I finished, they left me alone for a while in a small room. There, for the first time since dinner, I allowed myself to tremble. Not from fear of the law, but from the certainty of having been one step away from dying by the hand of the one I had raised with so much love. By mid-morning, the doctor appeared again with more information. The substance found in my son-in-law's blood was not common. It was an industrial chemical that in small doses could cause severe poisoning, and in larger doses, death. Everyone present fell silent. My daughter no longer feigned fainting upon hearing that. She went rigid with her back straight, as if an invisible thread were holding her up. The prognosis is reserved, but stable, added the doctor. I felt a contained relief. That man whom I had saved without intending to was still alive, and yet his survival would not bring peace. It would bring questions. That afternoon, the agents went to my daughter's house. They collected the remaining Cupcakes jars from the kitchen trash bags. I remained in the hospital waiting room alone, watching the stretchers pass by. I thought about how a small gesture had changed the course of so many lives. A change of plates. An act almost insignificant, and yet as decisive as a gunshot. When I could finally see my son-in-law for a few seconds, he was pale, connected to wires, with tired eyes barely open. I approached carefully. "David," he murmured with difficulty. The taste was weird. "What taste?" I asked. "Bitter behind the sweet." I nodded without saying more. That single phrase was enough for me as an intimate confirmation. That night, I returned to my house for the first time since the dinner. Everything was exactly the same as when I left. The table set the ornaments, lit the tree shining naively next to a nativity scene that now seemed cruel to me. I entered slowly, as if that house were not mine. I turned off the lights one by one. The silence became deep again. I sat in the kitchen in the same chair where I had eaten dinner hours before. I imagined my hands taking that cupcake, bringing it to my mouth trustingly. I imagined the burning rising up my throat, the suffocation, the floor getting closer. I felt a chill run through my entire body. For the first time in many years, I had a vivid awareness of my own mortality, and along with it, of the fragility of the bonds I always believed unbreakable. The phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it. It said only this: "Tests confirmed toxic substance in one of the cupcakes. Investigation in progress." I set the device down slowly. My daughter had gone from smiling hostess to possible suspect in a matter of hours, and I had gone from trusting father to silent witness of an attempted murder. I looked at the Christmas tree one last time before going up to my room. The star on top shone with a light that now seemed foreign, almost mocking. I lay down dressed without even undressing, with my eyes open in the gloom. I knew then that what happened was not an accident or a misunderstanding. It was the first act of a monstrous truth that was just beginning to reveal itself, and I, at 62 years old, had just discovered that the greatest danger did not come from outside. It came from my own blood. When that day dawned, I understood that the previous night had marked a line that could no longer be crossed back. I got up slowly with a tired body and a mind awake in a cruel way. The hospital had left a bitter taste of chlorine and fear in my mouth. I made coffee without turning on the radio. I was not ready to hear Christmas carols after having seen a man struggle between life and death over a pastry. While the water boiled, my memory began to rewind on its own, as if an invisible hand were rewinding my life to the origin of everything. My daughter, the little girl I carried on my shoulders when I could still run without getting winded, the one who drew crooked hearts for me on wrinkled paper, the one who promised she would never forget me when she grew up. That girl had disappeared years ago, but I had refused to accept it. I remember the day she began to change. It was not abrupt. It was not obvious. It was a sum of small gestures. Fewer calls, less laughter, less interest in my words. I justified everything with adult life, with work, with obligations. I told myself it was normal, that this is how children grow up, but it was not just growth, it was distance. Over time, her ambition began to show a strange shine. She spoke of money with an urgency I did not recognize in her, of investments of status, of important people. She asked for my advice only to discard it. I smiled proud to see her walk alone, not noticing that she was already starting to push me out of her way. When she married, I thought she had found stability. Her husband seemed like a simple man, hard-working, never intimate with me but correct. However, within a few years, economic tensions disguised as bad times began. Every visit came accompanied by a request, a loan, an emergency. I gave without asking. I always gave without asking. One afternoon 2 years ago, I heard her arguing with her husband in the kitchen. I was in the dining room pretending to read. She screamed at him that without money, no one respected her, that she was tired of depending on others, that she needed to secure the future. Those words engraved themselves in me like a warning I did not want to read in time. Then came the insistence with my documents, the will, the properties, the accounts, always with a kind smile, always with the excuse of planning ahead. I avoided the subject because it made me feel old, and because deep down I did not want to imagine life without her. Near, even though she was already drifting away. A few months ago, however, I noticed something new in her eyes, a tense, calculating shine. It was no longer just ambition, it was haste, as if time were playing against her. She visited me, often spoke to me with a sudden sweetness she had never had. That should have aroused my suspicions. Instead, it aroused my hope for reconciliation. I remember now the way she looked at me that last week before Christmas, as if I were a pending transaction, as if my existence had gone from being a father figure to that of an obstacle. When she hugged me, she did it with a strange stiffness. I chose to believe she was nervous about the party. That was my great blindness. The phone rang near noon. It was the hospital. Michael was stable, but still unconscious. I thanked the news with a broken voice. I sat back down at the table with the cup of coffee now cold in my hands. I thought of him, of his body pierced by a poison he was not meant to touch. I thought also of my daughter, of everything she had to push down inside herself to reach that point. In the afternoon, a neighbor knocked on my door. She came with an uncomfortable expression. "David, they say the police were at your daughter's house last night," she murmured. "That there was something with some cakes." I nodded without giving details. The truth no longer belonged only to me. When she left, I understood that my daughter's public image was beginning to crack, and with it, the castle of appearances she had built with so much effort. Ambition had not only changed her character, it had transformed her into someone capable of crossing unthinkable limits. That night, while reviewing old papers, I found a notebook where I wrote down her first expenses when she was a teenager. Uniforms, notebooks, shoes. I wrote everything down, not for control, but for care. That small notebook contrasted with the woman now facing an investigation for attempted homicide. The leap seemed impossible to comprehend. I wondered at what moment I lost moral authority over her. Not the authority of fear, but that of respect. Perhaps it was when I yielded too much, when I preferred to avoid conflicts, instead of marking boundaries, when I confused love with compliance. That night I dreamed of her as a child, sitting on my knees, looking at me with those same eyes that scanned stories with wonder. I woke up with dried tears on my face. A father's pain resembles no other pain. It does not scream. It sinks slowly. The next day the hospital called again. Michael had woken up and could now speak with some clarity. I prepared my papers and left with a tight heart. I knew that meeting could tear the last veil of doubt. When I entered the room, I saw him thinner, pale but conscious. He looked at me with a gesture of relief. "David," he whispered, "I thought I was dying." I sat next to his bed. "Your time has not ended yet," I replied, "and perhaps thanks to that, we will have answers." He closed his eyes for a few seconds before speaking. It was her. He murmured with difficulty. I saw her put something in the sugar bowl when no one was looking. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was part of the decoration. I felt the world shrinking around me. Are you sure? I asked. The taste, he said. It was different. Bitter behind the sweet. I will never forget it. There was no need for him to say more. I left the room with weak legs. That confirmation, spoken in whispers from a hospital bed, sealed every doubt. My daughter had not hesitated. I had done so for years. That afternoon, the police took a new statement. I was no longer just the suspicious father. I was the witness to a solid and cruel truth. Upon returning to my house, I understood that the woman I had raised no longer existed, that in her place was someone capable of looking into eyes and smiling while planning an end. The idea churned my stomach. That night, in front of the mirror, I observed myself for a long time. I saw myself old-tired, wounded inside, and even so, a new certainty broke through my thoughts. I could no longer protect her. I should no longer do it, because protecting her now would mean betraying myself. And because the last Christmas we spent together was not just a ruined party. It was the exact day I understood I had lost my daughter long before almost losing my life. I returned to my daughter's house the next afternoon, when I knew she would stay all day at the hospital accompanying her husband. The police had already passed by several times, but I needed to return alone, without official questions, without eyes on me. I needed to face that space with my own eyes. I opened the door with the spare key I still kept. The smell of recent cleaning hit me immediately, too intense to be natural. They had tried to erase something. One always cleans harder when one wants to hide guilt. The house was silent. The Christmas tree was still lit. The lights twinkled as if nothing had happened. That forced normality was disturbing to me. I walked slowly toward the kitchen. The marble counter was spotless. There were no crumbs, no traces of flour, no visible signs of cupcake preparation. Too much perfection for a chaotic night. I put on my glasses and began to observe with the patience the years gave me. I opened the drawers one by one. Silverware molds, baking paper. Everything in its place. Then I checked the pantry. The sugar was in a new jar recently filled. That detail made my skin crawl. I remembered my son-in-law's words. I saw her put something in the sugar bowl. I took the jar in my hands. It was heavy, too heavy for its size. I uncovered it carefully. A faint chemical smell, almost imperceptible, mixed with the sweetness of the sugar. I closed the jar immediately. My heart was beating hard, but it was not fear. It was a mixture of rage and clarity. I took a plastic bag from the drawer and placed the jar inside. I did not know exactly what to do with that yet, but I knew I should not leave it there. I continued searching. At the bottom of the trash can, I found a bag closed with a double knot. I opened it carefully. Inside were remnants of wrappers from a small transparent jar without a label. At the bottom, just a few dry drops of a thick liquid. I kept it all. Every object was a piece of a puzzle my mind had already begun to assemble. They were not there by chance. My daughter did not improvise. She was always meticulous. She had prepared everything in advance. I sat for a moment in the kitchen chair. I looked at the place where hours before we had shared dinner. The image of her smile, offering me the cupcake, returned with unbearable sharpness. It was not a smile of love. It was a smile of certainty of an announced ending. A shudder ran through me entirely. I walked to her bedroom, not out of morbid curiosity, but intuition. In the dresser drawer, among underwear and old papers, I found a blue folder. Inside were printouts of my bank statements, photocopies of deeds, sheets with underlined numbers, dates, calculations. I put a hand to my chest. She had been reviewing my assets for months without saying a word to me. Among those papers, I found a folded sheet with handwritten notes. My name, the approximate value of each property, a final sum written in red. Below a single word, Christmas. I felt like I ran out of air for an instant. There was no doubt whatsoever. I kept the folder just as it was. I took photographs of every sheet with my phone. I did not want to move anything more than necessary. I knew the police already had evidence, but I also knew that sometimes a truth must have multiple backings to be fully believed. Before leaving, I went back to the kitchen. I looked at the place where I had left the sugar jar. I thought about how many times I had sweetened my life there with simple gestures, shared coffee light laughter. I never imagined sugar would become the proof of a deadly betrayal. I left the house and locked it. The sun was starting to set. The sidewalk was dyed with long shadows. I breathed deeply several times before getting into my car. I felt strange, as if I had just left the scene of a crime that was not yet finished. I went straight to the hospital. I needed to speak with Michael again. When I entered his room, he was awake, more conscious than the day before. I showed him, without saying a word, the photo of the sugar jar. His eyes widened. "That was on the table," he whispered. "She got up before dessert and went to the kitchen." "Did you see her do anything else?" I asked. "Just move things," he said. "I thought she was organizing." I nodded. I did not need more. I asked him to rest. On the way out, I spoke with one of the officers guarding the hallway. I showed him the photos. His expression changed immediately. "This is important," he said. "We are going to add it to the file." That same night, they took a new statement from me. I handed over the images. I described what I had found. Every word stuck like a hot iron in my throat, but I did not reject any. I was not going to stay silent again. Not for her, not for anyone. When I returned to my house, it was already early morning. I took off my coat slowly, as if every garment now weighed double. I sat on the bed without turning on the light. In the gloom, I thought about everything I had just overcome in a few hours. The father who doubted the man who suspected the witness, who confirmed. Each version of myself seemed to succeed one another with pain. That night, I did not dream. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling until it began to lighten. In the morning, the phone rang early. It was the police. The agent's voice sounded more serious than before. "Mr. David," he said, "the lab confirmed traces of a toxic substance in the sugar from your daughter's house. It matches what was found in your son-in-law's blood." I closed my eyes. "So it was not an accident," I said. "No," he replied, "not anymore." I hung up, unable to speak. I got up and went to the window. The city was waking up like any other day. People walking buses, passing bakeries, opening their doors. The world kept turning indifferent to the ruin brewing inside a family. Deep down, something else broke inside me. It was not surprise. It was the last resistance of a father who still wanted to believe in his daughter's innocence. That last thread broke at last. Hours later, I learned that the agents had returned to the house with a broader warrant. They removed more jars, more objects, more evidence. I also learned that my daughter began to be formally considered a suspect. The word pierced me with a mixture of nausea and relief. Suspect. Not daughter. Not hostess. Suspect. That afternoon, I walked a lot aimlessly. I needed to tire my body to calm my mind. I thought about everything I had allowed in the name of love. I thought about how much I had kept quiet so as not to lose her. And yet I had been about to lose my life for that same silence. I understood then that I had not only discovered a crime, I had discovered the real price of having confused protection with blindness for so long. And I could no longer close my eyes ever again. The day dawned heavy, as if the air itself carried a thick guilt. I opened my eyes before the alarm went off with the sensation that something irreversible had already been set in motion. My daughter was now formally suspected of trying to murder her own father, although the body that almost paid with its life was her husband's. That truth settled in my chest like a stone impossible to move. The phone vibrated past 9 in the morning. It was the agent handling the case. "Mr. David, we need you to come sign an extension of your statement. New evidence reinforces the investigation." I did not ask what. I already sensed the magnitude of what had been discovered. At the precinct, they showed me the complete results of the analysis. The toxin found in the sugar and in my son-in-law's blood matched a restricted substance with limited access. It was not sold freely. To get it required contacts, planning, money. None of that had been an impulse. Nothing had been a mistake. When they told me that, I felt the last excuse still floating in me crumble. The idea that my daughter had acted out of momentary desperation. No, this had been cold, premeditated, calculated. "Do you suspect since when your daughter was planning this?" asked the agent. I took a deep breath. Since she started talking obsessively about my inheritance, I replied. Since she stopped treating me like a father and started treating me like a transaction. They nodded in silence. I signed the documents with a steady hand. I no longer trembled like the first few days. Fear had been displaced by something denser, a lucid sadness. Upon leaving, I sat for a moment on the sidewalk of the precinct. I looked at the gray sky. I thought about how many times I had avoided thinking about death, and now for the first time I understood how close I had been to it offered on a porcelain tray in the shape of a cupcake. In the hospital, my son-in-law had improved enough to speak with the police. I did not enter the room while he declared. I stayed in the hallway, holding on to the back of a chair. I heard fragments. She did not hesitate to serve me the dessert. She insisted I eat. She told me it was special. Every sentence was a hammer hitting a recent memory. When the investigator came out of the room, he looked at me gravely. His statement was clear, he said, confirming his wife intentionally served him that cupcake. I nodded, unable to speak. Minutes later, the doctor informed me that my son-in-law's prognosis was good. He would not die. That news, which should have been only a relief, arrived accompanied by a brutal awareness. His survival turned the attempted murder into a fully provable crime. There were no longer doubts. I left the hospital with slow steps. Every person I passed seemed to lead a normal, intact life. I, on the other hand, walked inside a story that no longer had a return. My daughter did not appear that day. Her lawyer had recommended silence. The family began to divide into two invisible camps, those who believed it was all a misunderstanding, and those who began to understand the gravity of what occurred. I kept myself on the sidelines of everyone. I was not looking for allies, I was looking to stay standing. That night upon arriving home, I opened the drawer where I kept my old documents. There was my original will signed years ago when I still believed blood guaranteed loyalty. I took it in my hands with a bitter calm. It was the same document my daughter had studied in secret, the same one she valued with greed on hidden sheets. I understood then something that froze my blood. The poisoning had not been just an attempted murder. It had been a shortcut to her inheritance. I was supposed to die fast, discreet, in the middle of a Christmas, where all deaths seem less suspicious. I sat down and cried in silence. Not for me. I cried for the daughter I thought I knew, and it was just then that I took the definitive decision. Before continuing, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far, and what you would do in his place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. The next day, I called my lawyer before breakfast. I asked for an urgent meeting. When he arrived, as soon as we sat down, I got to the point. I want to change everything, I told him. Will, beneficiaries, clauses, everything. He looked at me, seriously. Is there a concrete reason? My own history, I replied, and the attempt to erase it prematurely. I handed him the copies of the evidence. The lawyer reviewed them in silence. This is serious, David, he murmured. Very serious. More serious is trusting blindly, I replied. For hours we reviewed documents, properties, accounts. I decided that a large part of my assets would go to donations and social funds. Another part would remain under a strict clause that my daughter could never touch directly. Not out of hate, but justice. When we finished, I felt an enormous weight fall from my shoulders, as if I had recovered something that had been kidnapped for years. Upon leaving, the lawyer told me what you did today We'll strip her of the security she sought with such desperation. Maybe that way she stops looking for endings, I replied. That afternoon, while walking through the park, I remembered every scene of my life with her. Her first steps, her first bicycle, her first cry of disappointment. I never imagined that one day I would have to protect myself from my own daughter. At night, I received a message from an unknown number. It was her. I know everyone knows already, but you and I can still fix it. I read those words slowly. I did not reply immediately. I sat at my desk. I turned on the lamp. I placed in front of me the copies of the analysis, the photos of the sugar, the lawyer's new signatures. Everything was already past the point of no return. I replied with a single sentence, "You already fixed everything that Christmas night." Minutes later, she tried to call me. I did not answer. That night, I slept for the first time without nightmares since the poisoning attempt. I did not sleep well, but I slept without internal screams. Something was ordering itself inside me, although that order came accompanied by ruins. I understood with painful clarity that the truth no one suspected could no longer hide under the pink frosting of a cupcake. Now it was naked, brutal, irrefutable, and its face had exactly the shape of betrayal. Not a whole week passed since my last dry response before my daughter showed up at my front door. It was a gray afternoon, the kind that turns off the colors of the world. I was watering the front plants when I heard her voice behind me. "Dad!" I did not jump. For days I felt her close like a shadow that still did not dare to cross over completely. I turned slowly. She was standing a few feet away, arms hanging, tired look, face without makeup. She wore a dark coat that failed to hide how fragile she looked in that moment. For the first time since Christmas, there was no arrogance in her posture. There was something more akin to fear. "Can I come in?" she asked. I looked at her in silence for a long second. Then I nodded my head. She entered with slow steps, as if treading on unknown ground. I closed the door behind us and led her to the living room. I did not offer coffee. She did not ask for it either. She sat on the edge of the armchair, rigid, with hands intertwined. "How is he?" she asked finally. "Alive," I replied, "and that changes everything." She lowered her gaze. Her fingers began to tremble. Yes, she murmured. "It was not an accident," I told her coldly, "and you know it." She kept quiet. That silence was no longer of arrogance, but of calculation. She was testing my reactions, looking for cracks. "Dad," she said again, "all this got out of control. I just wanted to scare you a little." I felt a fire rise up my throat. "Scare me with what?" "With death," I replied. "Fear is not dosed when you play with poisons." She looked up sharply. Her eyes were wet, but not crying yet. "She was desperate," she whispered. "We didn't have money. The debts were drowning us. You know it. You always helped us. I thought that if something was going to happen to you, sooner or later, at least, everything would be resolved." That phrase fell like a sentence. Resolved for whom, I asked. "For me?" "For us," she stammered. "And what was I in that equation?" I insisted. "A transaction. An obstacle." She swallowed hard. "You were my father, but you were also the one who had what we needed." I closed my eyes for an instant. She had never told me something so brutal with such sincerity. "That thing you did has a name," I told her calmly. "And it is not desperation, it is greed." She shuddered. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "You never went through what I went through." "I went through much worse things," I replied, "and I never tried to kill anyone." Silence fell between us again. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. Life continued flowing on the margins of that conversation that no longer had a return. "The police are going to come for me," she said at last. "I know," the lawyer told me. "Then this is not a daughter's visit," I replied. "It is a goodbye visit." Her lips trembled. "I didn't want to say goodbye like this," she whispered. "I didn't want to say goodbye on a stretcher either," I told her. But decisions don't always ask us how we want to say goodbye. For the first time, her eyes filled with tears, but they were not the soft tears of guilt. They were the harsh tears of wounded pride. "Do you hate me?" she asked. I looked at her for a long second. I don't know if what I feel still has a name, I replied. Hate burns. What I feel is cold. She lowered her head. I did it out of fear of being left with nothing she said. You were left without something much bigger, I replied. You were left without a father who trusted you with his life. She looked up with a contained sob. Dad, she tried. Don't call me that now, I said firmly. That name is not used when one plans the death of the other. She put a hand to her mouth. The trembling shook her completely. I didn't think he would eat the cupcake, she whispered. I thought you would eat it. The world stopped for a second inside me. Thanks for confirming it, I told her. I no longer have any doubt. She got up abruptly. She walked a few steps around the room and sat back down undone. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she repeated. It wasn't like this. There is never a correct way to poison someone, I replied. Her tears began to fall soundlessly one after another. I did not get close to console her. Not any more. What are you going to do with me? She asked at last. Are you going to turn me in? I looked at her with a calm she did not expect. I already did everything I should, as a citizen, as a witness. And as a man, I replied. The rest no longer depends on me. But you could help me, she insisted. You could say you exaggerated, that you doubted that it was nerves. That is called lying, I said, and I lied for you my whole life. It's over. She stayed silent. Her breathing was now short, desperate. Then that's it, she murmured. I have nothing left. There's always something left, I replied. The thing is now, you don't like what you have left. She got up slowly. She walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. I thought you would be afraid of me, she said. I was afraid of you, I replied. That Christmas night. Now, not any more. She opened the door with difficulty. Before crossing it, she murmured, I just wanted to secure my future. And you lost the past, I replied. The door closed behind her with a dry sound. I remained standing in the middle of the living room, feeling that something definitive had just broken forever. That night, I understood that my revenge would not have screams, nor blows, nor blood. My revenge would be watching her face, what she had tried to avoid the truth. And now, for the first time since she was born, my daughter could no longer hide behind her smile. The house remained in a thick silence after my daughter left. It was not a silence of calm, but of conclusion. I stayed standing in front of the closed door for several seconds, listening to my own heartbeat booming in my ears like dry knocks against an invisible wall. That visit had been the last attempt at manipulation, the last desperate gesture of someone who knows the ground has sunk beneath their feet. I walked slowly to the dining room and sat down. The clock marked 6 in the evening. Outside, the sky began to darken. I turned on the desk lamp and opened the drawer where I had kept the copies of the new will days ago. I placed them in front of me. The paper crackled under my fingers as if it also understood the weight of what it meant. I remembered my lawyer's face while we ordered every clause. There was no judgment in his look, only professionalism. I was just another client resolving his legacy, although inside I was resolving something much deeper, the definitive rupture between what I was as a father and what I had to be as a man. The next day I returned to his office. I signed every sheet again with a steady pulse. There was no regret, there was no hesitation. Every signature was a closure, every initial a border. When I finished, the lawyer looked at me gravely. Starting today, your daughter is subject to a strict condition, he said. She could only access a minimal part of your assets if a judge determines that there is no criminal responsibility. I nodded. And that is not going to happen, I said. I left there with a mixture of fatigue and relief. I did not feel triumph. I felt order, the same type of order one feels after cleaning a wound that had been infected for a time, even if the pain still throbs. In the afternoon, I received a call from a bank. Requests for suspicious movements in accounts where she no longer appeared. Transfer attempts rejected. She had tried. even after everything she had tried to move what no longer belonged to her. That news did not surprise me. It only confirmed that her ambition remained intact, although now she was cornered. Hours later, the lawyer called me again. David, they tried to file an appeal to stop the change of the will. He said they allege emotional pressure. I let out a brief, bitter laugh. The emotional pressure almost killed me, I replied. You go ahead. We hung up. I stayed alone again. I thought then that my daughter still did not understand something fundamental, that she no longer had power over me. For years she had it without knowing it. Every gesture of mine was conditioned by the fear of losing her. Now that fear had died with the cupcake I did not eat. 2 days later, I learned that the judge had rejected any attempt at preventive challenge. The document was valid, legal untouchable for now. That was the first real crack in the armor of security my daughter had tried to forge with poison. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since Christmas, without startles, without nightmares. I woke up with a new lucidity. In the morning, while drinking coffee in the kitchen, I heard a knock on the door. It was an officer. He came to formally notify me that my daughter would be cited to testify again now under a more complex figure. Attempted homicide with aggravating circumstances. Those words spoken with such simplicity shook me inside. The officer looked at me with respect. "Did you do the right thing?" he said. I nodded without answering. The phrase was not enough to describe what I had lived. That same day, one of my brothers-in-law came to see me. He had always been a lukewarm man, one of those who prefer not to take sides. "David, the family is very divided," he said. "Some believe you should help her." I looked at him with serenity. "I already helped her my whole life," I replied. "Now she must face what she did." "But she is still your daughter," he insisted. "And I am still the man she tried to kill," I replied. He said nothing more. He lowered his gaze. He left without saying goodbye. I understood then that I was not only losing my daughter, I was also losing ancient illusions about family as an unconditional refuge. Sometimes family also wounds with more precision than anyone. That afternoon, while organizing the attic, I found an old box with photographs. I opened it. There she was, small, in a white dress, sitting on my knees on her first birthday. I was smiling widely. I observed myself from the past with tenderness and sadness. I spoke in a low voice to that man in the photo. "You didn't know what was coming, but you loved as you could." I put the box back. I did not break it. I did not throw it away. My history should not be denied, only placed in its just place. Hours later, the phone rang. It was a number I knew too well. I did not answer immediately. I let it ring until it cut off. A little while later, the message arrived. They told me I have nothing left, that everything changed. "I need to see you." I did not reply. I turned off the phone. That night from my window, I saw a car pass slowly in front of my house. I did not distinguish who was inside. I did not need to do so to know. My daughter's shadow still prowled, looking for a crack to enter. But the house no longer had open cracks for her. The next day, the local press began to insinuate the case. A woman investigated for poisoning at a Christmas dinner. The details were scarce, but the rumor grew. I did not read the papers. I did not want to know the distorted version of my own tragedy. Mid-morning, the lawyer called me with a different tone. "David," he said, "there exists a document your daughter did not know you had signed years ago." "Which one?" I asked. "A preventive power of administration activated automatically if you were considered incapacitated or deceased," he explained. "She thought that power would come into effect with your death. But that power was annulled yesterday with the new will." I felt a wave of cold. "Does that mean she no longer has access to anything I asked?" "Exactly," he replied. "Nothing immediate, nothing indirect, nothing hidden." I hung up slowly. That was the final blow she had not foreseen. Her whole plan was sustained on that power. That document was the door through which she believed she would enter at the end of her play. But that door no longer existed. For the first time since Christmas, I felt something resembling a silent justice arranging pieces. That afternoon, I received another message from her. Only one word: "You ruined my life." I read it calmly. I thought about the answer for several minutes. Finally, I wrote, "No, you tried to take mine." She did not write again. That night, I understood that the document she did not see coming was not only a legal paper, it was the symbol of something deeper. I had stopped being the father who protected at all costs, even when he was being betrayed. Now I was simply a man who was no longer willing to die, to maintain a lie, and her fall, which until then was invisible, began to accelerate in silence. The call arrived shortly after dawn. The sound of the phone no longer startled me like before, but it still brought with it a gravity that had become part of my days. It was the hospital. The nurse's tone was firm, professional, almost solemn. "Your son-in-law is fully conscious. The police already took a formal statement. They need you to present yourself today." I hung up and remained seated on the bed for several seconds. I knew what that day meant. It was not just the continuity of an investigation. It was the definitive moment when the truth would stop being a suspicion to become a public fact. I dressed slowly, like someone preparing for a funeral that is not foreign. At the hospital, the hallway was fuller than other times. 2 agents waited in front of my son-in-law's room. When I entered, he was already sitting partially up in bed, with color returning little by little to his face. His eyes, still tired, looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and shame. "Thanks for saving me without knowing it," he said as soon as he saw me. I shook my head. It was not a heroic act. It was an old man's instinct. He tried to smile, but did not quite manage it. Minutes later, the agents entered. They took out a recorder. They asked him to relate what happened one more time from the beginning. I remained in a corner, in silence. Michael recounted every detail with a precision that left no room for doubts. My daughter's insistence, the strange taste, the immediate burning, the sudden dizziness. When he mentioned the sugar bowl, I saw one of the police officers exchange looks with his partner. Upon finishing, one of the agents nodded. "It matches the lab analysis," he said. "He has traces of the substance in his system." Then they asked me to speak. I recounted what was found in the house, the jar, the papers, the photographs. Every word sealed one more nail in the coffin of the lie. Halfway through my statement, one of the officers received a call. He stepped away a few meters. Upon returning, his expression had changed. "They just confirmed something else," he announced. In the kitchen, they also found traces of the same substance on utensils used only to prepare the cupcakes. I felt the air become denser. "That is enough for an immediate arrest warrant," he added. No one spoke for an instant. I closed my eyes. The word arrest seemed too big, too definitive, and yet there was no longer any turning back. "Where is my daughter now?" I asked. "At her residence," replied the agent. "But that will change in the next few hours." I left the hospital with heavy steps. Outside, the sun shone in an absurd, almost cruel way. The world continued offering a clear day, while my life finished cracking inside. I sat on a bench in front of the entrance. I saw relatives of other patients leaving. I saw hugs, timid laughs, goodbyes. I wanted to think that somewhere someone was also celebrating that a loved one had survived. But in my chest, there was no space for celebrations. Near noon, the phone rang again. This time, it was my lawyer. "David," he said bluntly, "the prosecutor requested your daughter's arrest. The order will be executed today." I did not reply immediately. I looked at the ground. I did not feel surprise. I felt an ancient defeat seeping into my bones. "Thanks for letting me know," I said finally. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No, but I am not lying either." We hung up. The following hours were a silent wait. I walked through the neighborhood, without a fixed course. People greeted me as always. No one knew yet, and I carried a secret that weighed like a wet stone. At every corner, I imagined the moment the agents would knock on my daughter's door. I imagined her expression upon opening her voice, her fall. At nightfall, I was sitting in my dining room when the news interrupted the usual programming. Breaking news announced the anchorwoman. I looked up immediately. They showed blurry images of a police operation in front of a house I recognized without effort. It was my daughter's house. They did not play audio, only images. I saw patrol cars, curious neighbors, 2 agents entering. Minutes later, my daughter came out handcuffed between them, face covered, head down, the dark coat she had worn the day she came to see me. I felt a lump in my throat that left me breathless for an instant. The anchorwoman spoke of an alleged poisoning attempt occurred at a Christmas dinner. They did not mention names, but I knew that fragment of reality was already traveling the road toward the irreparable. I turned off the TV. I stayed sitting in the gloom for a long time. I did not cry. I did not scream. The muscles of my face remained rigid, as if my body refused to express something it would not know how to stop later. That same night, the phone rang once more. It was an unknown number. I answered. "Mr. David," said a firm voice, "we inform you that your daughter has been detained and transferred to the Central Precinct. Her statement will be taken in the next few hours." "I understand," I replied. "You could be cited again. I will be available." I hung up. I got up and walked to the window. The street was still. Some lights on in the neighboring houses. Dogs barking in the distance. I thought about her sitting now in a cold cell, facing for the first time the real consequences of her acts. I did not feel relief, nor revenge. I felt a thick sadness, almost physical. That night, I almost did not sleep. Every memory of her childhood returned like a silent wave. Her first day of school, her first lost tooth, her first heartbreak. And now that ending I never imagined writing for her. In the morning I was cited again by the prosecutor's office. They asked me final questions. They explained the charges to me clearly. Aggravated attempted homicide, premeditation, manipulation of toxic substances. I heard every word as if it belonged to someone else's story, and yet she carried my last name. Upon leaving, I met one of my nephews. He had red eyes. "Uncle, everyone knows already," he told me. "The family is in shock." I nodded. "Shock lasts a little while," I replied. "The truth lasts a lifetime." That afternoon, when the sun began to set, I sat alone in the kitchen. I made coffee. I drank it slowly. I thought that simple and honest taste was now the clearest limit I had against everything that had been corrupted. I understood that the day the truth came to light was not only the day they arrested my daughter, it was the day I definitively stopped protecting a lie, named love. And I understood also that from then on the story would cease to be private, because justice had already made it public. The night of her arrest was long, endless, as if time had become thick just to punish me with every second of awareness. I remained at home with the dining room light on, sitting at the table where so many times we shared bread, laughter, and feigned silences. Outside the city breathed, normally ignorant of the collapse of an entire family. Past midnight the phone rang. It was my lawyer. "David," he said with a contained voice, "the charge is formal. There will be no immediate release. They will transfer her to the detention center before dawn." I thanked him for the information and hung up. I did not ask anything else. I no longer needed details to know that was definitive. The next morning, the scandal was already in all the media. Headlines, opinions, conjectures. No one pronounced her name, but everyone knew who it was about. A woman arrested for trying to poison her father during a Christmas dinner. That phrase pierced me like a dull blade. Deep, slow, impossible to avoid. Mid-morning calls began to arrive. Relatives, acquaintances, people who hadn't spoken to me for years. Some sought to confirm the rumor, others to offer me clumsy solidarity. I answered little and cut them off fast. I did not have the strength to listen to others' justifications. Her husband appeared at my house that same day, pale, thin, still weak from the poisoning. He walked with difficulty. "Did I have to come?" he said as soon as he entered. "I couldn't stay without telling you something." We sat face to face. For an instant neither spoke. I never thought she would be capable of something like this, he murmured with a dull voice. I argued with her about money, yes, but I never believed she could plan something like this. Neither did I replied. And I have known her since she was born. He lowered his gaze. She used me, he said. And she almost killed me? She used us both, I replied with bitter serenity. We remained in silence for a few seconds. I'm going to ask for a divorce, he said suddenly. I can't look at her again. I nodded. There were no words for that. The marriage she had used as an alibi and as an instrument crumbled along with everything else. When he left, the house became silent again, a different silence from the previous days, heavier, more definitive. In the afternoon, a judicial agent presented himself with a notification, preventive embargo of all accounts and assets in my daughter's name. Vehicles, cards, properties, everything was frozen until further order. I signed as a witness. Doing so, I felt something resembling the closing of a steel door. Hours later, I received a message from an unknown number. It was a lawyer who no longer represented her. All private support has been withdrawn. No one wants to take the case, I read without surprise. When the truth is revealed, loyalties are also revealed. That night, while dining alone, the news showed images of the transfer of detainees to the provincial jail. Between covered faces and flashing red lights, I distinguished her figure for a second. She walked, escorted, head down, hair messy, clothes wrinkled. She did not look like the confident woman who organized elegant dinners and spoke of ambitious investments. She looked for the first time like someone facing the real weight of her acts. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt a deep, almost maternal sadness that surprised myself. I closed my eyes. I thought of her as a child, running across the yard with an ice cream melting in her hand, laughing without fear of the future. I thought about how much a life can twist without one realizing it. The next day I began to feel the true social consequences. Neighbors who avoided looking at me, others who approached with disguised curiosity. Some said in a low voice, "How awful, David." I nodded politely. No one yelled at me anymore. No one challenged me. Respect now arrived from a strange place, compassion. 2 days later, I was cited again by the prosecutor's office, this time to ratify my testimony before a judge. I entered the room with slow but firm steps. There she was, sitting behind glass with a gaunt face. She did not look up when I entered. I did not get close either, I declared calmly. I related everything again without softening anything. When I finished, the judge announced that preventive prison was maintained. I heard her sob behind the glass. I did not look at her. Upon leaving, my nephew awaited me in the hallway. "She asked me to talk to you," he said cautiously. "I have nothing left to say to her," I replied. "She says she wants to ask for your forgiveness." I took a deep breath. Forgiveness does not avoid consequences, and I am no longer the judge of her life. My nephew lowered his head and walked away. That afternoon, when I returned home, I found a bag with her things left at the entrance by her husband. Closed documents, personal photographs. I did not want to check anything. I carried it to a back room and left it there closed. I was not prepared to face objects that still kept her smell. Days passed. The story ceased to be news. The media started looking for other scandals. The family remained broken in fragments that no longer fit. Some aligned with me, others with her. I did not take sides in any internal war. Mine had already ended. 1 week after her arrest, the final notification arrived. Formal charges caused elevated to trial, without bail possible for the moment. Her future, the one she had tried to secure with poison, now remained in the cold hands of justice. That night, sitting on the bed, I understood that she had lost everything. Money, her freedom, her reputation, her marriage, her social circle. Everything had crumbled in a matter of hours, but I also understood something even more painful. I had lost a daughter before even she lost everything. I did not sleep all morning. The past paraded before my eyes like a poorly edited movie. happy moments mixed with signs I never wanted to read. I asked myself, as all parents do, sometime in what exact instant did we start losing each other? At dawn, I got up and made coffee. Steam rose slowly from the cup. I looked at my trembling hands, not from age this time, but from the weight of what was lived. I understood then that my daughter's fall had not given me back anything I had lost. It had not given me back trust. It had not given me back time. It had not given me back tranquility. Revenge, I understood finally with brutal clarity, does not give back. It only orders. And that night, while she lost everything in a cold cell, I definitely lost the last illusion that love alone is always enough. Time, after everything that happened, started moving in a strange way. The days no longer passed with the lightness of before, but they didn't weigh like the first weeks after the arrest either. It was a new rhythm made of long silences, sober routines, and a calm that was not born of happiness, but of exhaustion. I kept waking up early, making coffee without sugar, looking at the street from the window as if searching in it for some sign that everything had been just a nightmare. The trial had not started yet, but the date was already set. Every morning I tore a page off the calendar with a mixture of resignation and expectation, not from anxiety, but because I knew that day would mark the definitive closure of a wound that no longer bled, but didn't heal either. One afternoon I received the official citation to testify at the trial. The envelope arrived by certified mail. I opened it with steady hands without the tremor that accompanied me for so many months. I read my full name, the file number, the date, everything written with an administrative coldness that contrasted with the story those words carried. I kept the citation in the desk drawer. I no longer needed to review it again and again. I knew exactly what I had to say, not from legal preparation, but because the truth was already ordered inside me. Days later, I went to the hospital again to visit my ex-son-in-law. He was already walking on his own. He was still thin, but with a new strength in his gaze. "I'm moving," he told me. "Far from here." "It is a good decision," I replied. "I don't want to keep breathing the same air as her." I nodded without judging. "Everyone flees however they can. I want you to know something, David," he added. "I don't blame you for anything. If you hadn't switched the plates, I wouldn't be here. If I hadn't trusted so much before I replied, maybe none of this would have been necessary." We stayed in silence. Then he shook my hand with sincere gratitude. I knew that man whom I had saved without intending to would also end up being one of the few people who understood the totality of what happened. The day of the trial arrived without me noticing. The sky was gray like so many other times, but that morning the gray seemed thicker. I dressed in the dark suit I barely used. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was not only older, he was thinner, more serious, more aware. In the courtroom, the murmur of people filled the air, lawyers, journalists, police, curious faces. I sat in the place assigned to witnesses. I did not look to the back of the room until I heard the dragging of handcuffs. Then I looked up. There she was, my daughter, smaller than I remembered, her gaunt face, sunken eyes curved back. There was no longer a trace of that pride that used to hold her chin high. For a second our gazes met. There was no resentment in hers, nor pleading, only a dry, resigned sadness, as if she finally understood what she had done. I looked away. When the judge called me to testify, I walked to the stand with slow but firm steps. I pronounced my oath and began to speak. I related every detail since that Christmas Eve. The smile, the cupcake, the unease, the switching of plates, the husband's fall, the ambulance, the hospital, the sugar, the papers, the evidence, the visit, the final conversation. I did not raise my voice. I did not seek drama. I did not avenge anything with words. I only told the truth like someone reviewing a story already accepted. When I finished, the judge nodded. The lawyers exchanged looks. In the room, not a single whisper was heard. The truth, when spoken without rage, weighs more. My daughter testified afterward. She partially recognized the facts. She did not deny having adulterated the substance, but spoke of desperation, fear debts, depression. I listened to her without moving. I did not deny her desperation, but the attempt could not be denied either. At the end of the day, the judge ordered a recess prior to the sentencing. I went out to the hallway with a tight chest. I leaned against a wall to catch my breath. A journalist approached with a microphone. I did not answer him. I had nothing to say to the world. I had already said everything to whom it concerned. Hours later, the preliminary verdict was announced: guilt-confirmed prison sentence, effective to be determined in the final instance. She listened to the reading without collapsing. I did not move either, not even when the agents led her out of the room. I did not cry. I did not smile. I only closed my eyes. Days later, I received a letter written in her handwriting. Brief, without excuses. Dad, I don't ask you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that now I understand everything. Maybe too late. I read the letter several times. I did not reply. Not out of hate. Out of respect for that silence that had saved me so many times. When the next Christmas arrived, there was no big table or Christmas carols on the radio. I spent Christmas Eve alone with a simple dinner. At midnight, I raised my glass of water and toasted in silence. Not for what was lost, not for what was wrong. I toasted to being alive. That was the true victory. Today I write these lines from the same house, with the same windows, but with a different man inside. I didn't get stronger from the pain. I became clearer. I learned that limitless love can also be a form of destruction, that blood does not guarantee loyalty, and that sometimes the greatest show of dignity is daring not to save the one who didn't want to save you. Christmas will never be the same for me. Every December that smile will return in my memory. The cupcake, the switched plate, the twisted destiny in a minimal gesture. But something else will also return. The certainty that I heard in time, that inner voice that told me something was wrong. Not everyone gets that second chance. I had it. And although the price was unbearable, I keep breathing. I walk, I sleep, I look at the sky. Sometimes with sadness, sometimes with a peace I didn't know existed. The story ended in the courts, yes. But for me, the story ended that night, when I understood that my life was also worth protecting, even from my own blood. A year has passed since that Christmas that changed my life forever. The tree returned to occupy its place in the living room, but I no longer look at it with the innocence of before. Now I observe it with respect as a silent witness of everything I was and everything I survived. I learned to live without waiting for calls that will no longer come. I learned to walk without looking back every 5 steps. And above all, I learned that true love does not consist of sacrificing oneself until disappearing, but in knowing how to protect oneself without losing humanity. My daughter serves her sentence. Sometimes I think of her not with resentment, but with the quiet sadness of someone accepting a loss that can no longer be mended. I am still here with my plants, my mornings of coffee, my long silences and my serene nights. I gained nothing from that tragedy, but I recovered something I had lost without realizing it, my right to live without fear. I am David, and this was my story. Subscribe to the channel to keep listening to real stories that shake, teach, and leave a mark. Like this video if this story touched your heart. Leave us in the comments what you thought of this story, what you would have done in my place, and from what city you are watching us. Thanks for joining me until the end. Your support keeps these stories being told.